The morning light filtered through my kitchen window in that soft way it always did in early October, casting golden patterns across the oak table where I sat with my coffee. I was 60 years old, living alone in the same house in Cleveland where Thomas and I had raised Jonathan, and some mornings the silence felt heavier than others. This particular Tuesday, I had no idea it would be the day everything changed. I was sorting through the mail when I heard Amanda's car pull into the driveway. That sharp sound of expensive tires on gravel always announced her arrival before she even knocked. My daughter-in-law had a way of making her presence known, whether through her perfectly manicured nails tapping against surfaces or the click of her designer heels on my hardwood floors. "Margaret, are you home?" she called out, letting herself in without waiting for an answer. That was Amanda's way, assuming she was always welcome, always entitled to whatever space she occupied. "In the kitchen, dear," I replied, folding the electric bill and setting it aside. I smoothed down my cardigan and tried to arrange my face into something pleasant. After 3 years of marriage to my son, I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was perpetually auditioning for Amanda's approval. She swept into the kitchen wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the October wind outside. At 28, Amanda had the kind of beauty that demanded attention: sharp cheekbones, bright blue eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone when she chose to use it. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said, settling into the chair across from me without removing her coat. She didn't ask for coffee, didn't inquire about my health, or make the small talk that usually preceded serious conversations. Amanda had never been one for pleasantries when she wanted something. "Of course, Ma. Baharis, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table, and I noticed her wedding ring, the simple gold band Jonathan had given her. Nothing like the elaborate set she'd originally wanted. They'd had to scale back the wedding plans when Jonathan's accounting firm went through layoffs, and I knew Amanda still harbored resentment about the compromises they'd made. "Jonathan and I have been talking," she began, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something significant. "We never had a proper honeymoon, you know. We went to that bed and breakfast in Pennsylvania for 3 days, but that wasn't what we'd planned." I nodded, remembering how disappointed she'd been. Originally, they'd booked 2 weeks in Italy, but the job situation had forced them to cancel. I'd offered what I could from my savings to help, but it hadn't been enough for the trip she'd dreamed of. "We've been looking at packages for Italy," she continued, pulling out her phone and swiping through what I assumed were travel websites. "There's this amazing villa in Tuscany, and we could do Rome, Florence, Venice, the whole experience we always wanted." "That sounds wonderful, Amanda. I'm sure you and Jonathan would have a beautiful time." "The thing is," she said, and I heard the shift in her tone that made my stomach tighten, "we need to come up with about $15,000. Jonathan's been putting in extra hours, and we've been saving, but it's not enough." I waited, sensing there was more coming. Amanda's eyes had taken on that calculating look I'd learned to recognize over the years. "I was thinking about your jewelry collection," she said finally, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. My hand instinctively went to my throat, where I wore Thomas's grandmother's pearl necklace almost every day. It wasn't expensive by Amanda's standards, but it had been in his family for 4 generations. After he passed 2 years ago, wearing it made me feel connected to him, to the life we'd built together. "My jewelry?" I asked, though I already understood where this conversation was heading. "You have some beautiful pieces, Margaret. That emerald ring, the pearl set, the gold bracelet with the diamonds, they're just sitting in your jewelry box, and you rarely wear most of them. We could get them appraised, and I bet they're worth quite a bit." I felt something cold settle in my chest. The emerald ring had been Thomas's first anniversary gift to me. The gold bracelet was what he'd given me when Jonathan was born. Each piece held memories that were worth more to me than their monetary value. But I could see that Amanda didn't understand that kind of attachment. "I don't know, dear," I said carefully. "Those pieces, they mean a great deal to me." Amanda's expression hardened slightly. "I understand they have sentimental value, but think about it practically. What good are they doing sitting in a box? You could help Jonathan and me start our marriage off right, create new memories. Isn't that what Thomas would have wanted?" The way she invoked my late husband's name made my breath catch. Amanda had met Thomas only a few times before he passed. Brief encounters at family dinners where she'd been polite but distant. Now she was presuming to know what he would have wanted, using his memory to manipulate me into giving up the very things that kept him close to me. "I need to think about it," I said, standing up to refill my coffee cup even though it was still half full. I needed to move, to do something with my hands while I processed what she was asking of me. "Margaret," Amanda's voice became softer, more persuasive. "I know this is hard, but these are just objects. The real memories are in your heart, right? And think about how happy you'd make Jonathan. He works so hard, and he's been so stressed about money lately. This could be exactly what we need to start fresh." I turned back to face her, coffee mug warm between my palms. Amanda was watching me with those bright blue eyes, and I could see she'd already convinced herself this was reasonable, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to help them. "How much do you think they're worth?" I heard myself ask, though part of me couldn't believe I was even entertaining this conversation. "I did some research online," she said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from her purse. "Based on the photos I took when I was here for Jonathan's birthday, I think we could get at least 12,000, maybe 15 if we're lucky. It would be enough for the whole trip." Photos. She'd taken photos of my jewelry without asking, had researched their value, had come here with a plan already formed. The premeditation of it made me feel naive for thinking this was a spontaneous request. "You photographed my jewelry?" I asked. "Just casual shots while we were here for dinner," she said with a wave of her hand. "I wasn't snooping, Margaret. I just noticed how beautiful your pieces are, and when we started planning this trip, I remembered them. But I remembered that dinner. Amanda had excused herself to use the restroom and had been gone for quite a while. I'd assumed she was making phone calls or touching up her makeup. Now I realized she'd been in my bedroom, going through my jewelry box, cataloging my most precious possessions like inventory. "I need time to consider this," I said firmly. Amanda's smile faltered. "How much time? Because these travel packages have limited availability, and if we wait too long, the prices will go up for peak season. A few days?" "Margaret, I really think you're overthinking this. It's just jewelry. Jonathan is your only son, and this is his only chance at the honeymoon we should have had. Don't you want to be part of making that happen?" The way she phrased it made me feel selfish for hesitating, as if my attachment to these pieces was somehow preventing my son's happiness. I thought about Jonathan, about how hard he'd been working, about the strain I'd seen in his face during recent visits. Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I was being too sentimental about material things. "I understand you want to help him," I said, "but these pieces are all I have left of Thomas, of our life together. They're not just jewelry to me." "But Thomas is gone," Amanda said, and her voice carried a sharp edge now, "and holding on to things isn't going to bring him back. You could use his memory to help Jonathan instead of just hoarding these things that nobody else gets to enjoy." Hoarding. The word hit me like a slap. I stood there in my kitchen, looking at this young woman who had married my son, who lived in my old neighborhood in a house we'd helped them buy, who wore clothes that cost more than my monthly Social Security check, and she was calling me a hoarder for wanting to keep my wedding jewelry. "I think you should go now," I said quietly. Amanda's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe I was dismissing her. "Margaret, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just trying to be practical here. We're family, and family helps each other." "Yes, we are family," I agreed. "And family doesn't inventory each other's belongings or demand that widows sell their wedding jewelry." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Fine, think about it. But remember, Jonathan really needs this, and you're the only one who can help him. I hope you'll make the right choice." After she left, I sat back down at my kitchen table and stared out at the yard, where Thomas and I had planted maple trees 30 years ago. They were mature now, their leaves turning brilliant orange and red, and I wondered what he would say if he were here. Would he tell me to sell the jewelry, to help our son, or would he understand why I couldn't bear to let go of the only physical reminders I had of our 40-year marriage? That evening, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and opened my jewelry box for the first time in weeks. Each piece sat in its designated spot, the emerald ring in the small velvet slot, the pearl necklace draped carefully across the top tier, the gold bracelet with its tiny diamonds nestled beside my everyday pieces. I picked up the emerald ring and slipped it onto my finger. Thomas had saved for months to buy it for our first anniversary, working overtime at the steel plant and skipping lunches to afford something he thought worthy of me. A beautiful stone for a beautiful woman, he'd said when he gave it to me, his hands shaking with nervousness. Now Amanda saw it as nothing more than a commodity, something to be converted to cash for her dream vacation. The thought made my chest ache with a loneliness I hadn't felt since the first months after Thomas's death. I closed the jewelry box and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about Amanda's words, about being called a hoarder, about her casual dismissal of my grief and attachment. By morning, I knew I had to make a decision, but I also knew that whatever I chose would change something fundamental in my relationship with my son and his wife. What I didn't know yet was that Amanda had no intention of waiting patiently for my answer. 2 days passed before Jonathan called. I was in my garden, pulling the last of the summer tomatoes before the first frost, when my phone rang from the kitchen windowsill where I'd left it. By the time I got inside, wiping dirt from my hands on my apron, I'd missed the call, but he called back immediately. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. His voice carried that tired edge I'd been hearing more often lately, the sound of a man carrying too much weight on his shoulders. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "Amanda told me about your conversation the other day, about the jewelry." I felt my stomach drop. Of course she'd told him. She'd probably presented it as my being unreasonable, my refusing to help family when they needed it most. I could picture the scene, Amanda tearful and frustrated, painting me as the selfish mother-in-law standing in the way of their happiness. "What did she tell you exactly?" I asked, settling into my kitchen chair. "That you won't help us with the honeymoon." "Mom, I know the jewelry means something to you, but we really need this. Amanda's been so unhappy since we had to cancel Italy the first time. She feels like everyone we know has had these amazing honeymoons, and we just didn't." I closed my eyes, hearing my son's voice crack slightly. Jonathan had always been sensitive, always worried about disappointing people. Even as a child, he'd taken on everyone else's emotions as his own burden. "Jonathan, honey, your father and I honeymooned at Niagara Falls. We stayed in a little motel and ate at diners, and it was perfect because we were together. That was different, Mom. Times were different then. Amanda's friends all went to Europe or the Caribbean. She feels like she's settled, like she married beneath her social level." The words hit me like cold water. Married beneath her social level. So that's how Amanda saw our family, as something she'd had to lower herself to accept. "Is that how you feel, Jonathan? That you're not good enough for her?" "I don't know anymore," he said, and I heard the exhaustion in his voice. "All I know is that she's miserable, and if I could just give her this one thing, maybe she'd stop looking at other couples and feeling like we failed before we even started. Sweetheart, a marriage isn't built on expensive trips. Your father and I know, Mom. I know you and Dad were happy with simple things, but Amanda isn't you. She needs more, and I love her, so I want to give her what she needs." I wanted to tell him that if Amanda truly loved him, she wouldn't need him to bankrupt his widowed mother to prove his worth. I wanted to explain that real love doesn't demand proof through material sacrifice. But I could hear in his voice that he'd already made up his mind about what love looked like, and it involved giving Amanda everything she wanted, no matter the cost. "The jewelry isn't just objects to me, Jonathan. Each piece represents a memory with your father. But Dad's dead, Mom." His words came out harsher than I think he intended, because he immediately softened his tone. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. But Dad would want you to help me, wouldn't he? He'd want me to be happy in my marriage." I thought about Thomas, about the man who'd worked double shifts to buy me an emerald ring, who'd saved for months to get me a pearl necklace for our 10th anniversary. Would he want me to sell those symbols of his love to fund someone else's luxury vacation? The Thomas I knew had believed in earning what you wanted, not in demanding it from others. "Your father would want you to be happy," I said carefully, "but he'd also want you to find that happiness in the right ways." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that if your marriage needs my jewelry to survive, then maybe the problem isn't the lack of a honeymoon." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Amanda was right. She said you'd be selfish about this. Selfish. The word came out as barely a whisper. Yes, selfish. You're living in that big house all alone, surrounded by things from the past, while your son is struggling to build a future. Amanda and I are working 2 jobs each just to pay our mortgage, and you're sitting on thousands of dollars worth of jewelry that you never even wear. I wear my pearls almost every day. 1 necklace. Mom, what about all the rest? What about the emerald ring that sits in your jewelry box? What about the diamond bracelet that hasn't seen daylight in years? You're hoarding them like some kind of, like Dad's still coming home to see you wearing them. Each word felt like a physical blow. My own son, the boy I'd raised, calling me selfish for wanting to keep the jewelry his father had given me, accusing me of hoarding memories like they were worthless junk I couldn't bear to throw away. Jonathan, those pieces are all I have left of a dead man. Mom, they're reminders of a dead man, and you're choosing them over helping your living son. The phone slipped slightly in my trembling hand. I couldn't believe this was my Jonathan talking, my sweet boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the most beautiful mom in the world. This version of my son, this angry, desperate man willing to hurt me to get what his wife wanted, I didn't recognize him. I think, I said slowly, that you and Amanda need to find another way to pay for your trip. There is no other way. His voice rose to nearly a shout. Do you think I haven't tried everything? Do you think I want to be asking my mother to sell her jewelry? I've applied for loans. I've worked overtime until I can barely stand up. I've sold everything I own that has any value. This is the only option left. It's not the only option, Jonathan. You could go somewhere less expensive, or wait until you've saved more money. Or my wife could leave me because I can't provide for her the way she deserves. The words hung between us like a threat. Amanda had made it clear to him that his worth as a husband depended on his ability to give her the lifestyle she wanted, and now he was passing that ultimatum on to me. If Amanda would leave you over a vacation, don't. His voice turned sharp again. Don't criticize my wife. She's been patient enough. She married me knowing I didn't have money, and she stuck by me through the job losses and the financial stress. The least I can do is give her this one thing she's dreamed about. I wanted to ask him if he'd ever dreamed about anything, if his own wants and needs mattered in this marriage, or if he'd become nothing more than Amanda's provider. But I could hear in his voice that he was too far gone, too convinced that his value as a man was tied to his ability to fund his wife's desires. I need time to think, I said. How much time? Because Amanda's already looking at flights, and the prices are going up every day we wait. A week, he sounded incredulous. Mom, this isn't some major life decision. It's jewelry. You either help your son or you don't. It is a major life decision, Jonathan. You're asking me to sell the last physical reminders I have of my marriage to your father, and I'm telling you that my marriage to Amanda might not survive if you don't. There it was, the ultimatum laid bare. Sell my jewelry or lose my son's marriage, help fund Amanda's dream vacation, or watch my family fall apart. The weight of it pressed down on me like a physical force. After I hung up, I walked through my house touching the things Thomas and I had collected over 40 years of marriage. The ceramic vase we'd bought on our trip to North Carolina, the wooden clock he'd made in his workshop, the family photos covering every surface, chronicling Jonathan's growth from baby to man. In our bedroom, I opened the jewelry box again and looked at each piece with new eyes. The emerald ring seemed smaller somehow, less significant. The pearl necklace felt heavier around my neck. Had I been foolish to attach so much meaning to these objects? Was Amanda right that the real memories were in my heart, not in these material things? But when I tried to imagine selling them, imagine handing them over to some stranger who would only see their monetary value, my chest tightened with panic. These weren't just jewelry to me. They were love letters Thomas had written in gold and gems, promises he'd made and kept throughout our marriage. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying Jonathan's words, the anger in his voice, the way he'd called me selfish. I thought about Amanda's calculating smile, her casual dismissal of my grief, her presumption that my possessions were somehow available for her use. By dawn, I knew I had to make a choice, but what I didn't yet understand was that there was a third option I hadn't considered. one that would surprise everyone, including myself. The next morning, I was startled by the doorbell ringing before 8 o'clock. I looked out the front window and saw Amanda's car in the driveway again. But this time, Jonathan's truck was parked behind it. They'd come together, presenting a united front. I opened the door to find them both on my front porch, Amanda perfectly put together despite the early hour, Jonathan looking rumpled and tired as if he hadn't slept either. "We need to talk," Amanda said, pushing past me into the house before I could invite them in. Jonathan followed more slowly, not meeting my eyes. "Hi, Mom," he mumbled. In my living room, they sat together on the couch while I took the armchair across from them. Amanda immediately pulled out her phone and opened what looked like a travel website. "I've been doing more research," she announced, "and I found an amazing package deal that includes Rome, Florence, and Venice, plus a 2-day cooking class in Tuscany. It's exactly what we dreamed about, but it's only available for 3 more days before the price goes up by $2,000. She turned the phone toward me, showing me photos of luxury hotels and scenic landscapes. "This could be our honeymoon, Margaret. This could be the start of our real married life together." I looked at the screen, then at my son's face. He was staring at his hands, and I could see the shame there mixed with desperate hope. "How much?" I asked. $14,700, Amanda said quickly. "But I think your jewelry could easily cover that, especially if we add in that gold watch of Thomas's." Jonathan mentioned that his father had a nice Omega. My breath caught. Now she wanted Thomas's watch too. The one I wound every morning, even though I had no one to tell me the time. The one that still held the slight scent of his aftershave. "You want his watch as well?" "Well, it makes sense to get everything appraised together," Amanda said with a shrug. "One trip to the jewelry store instead of multiple visits." I looked at Jonathan, waiting for him to say something, to show some sign that he understood what his wife was asking of me. But he just sat there, shoulders hunched, letting Amanda do all the talking. "And what happens after Italy?" I asked quietly. Amanda blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what happens when you come back? When the honeymoon is over and you're still living in the same house, working the same jobs, dealing with the same financial stress? Will selling my jewelry have fixed any of that? We'll have had the experience," Amanda said firmly. "We'll have memories that no one can take away from us. Memories that cost me every reminder I have of my own marriage." For the first time, Amanda's polished facade cracked slightly. "Margaret, you're being dramatic. They're just things, objects. We're talking about creating experiences, about investing in our relationship. Then invest your own money in your relationship," I said. Amanda's face flushed. "We don't have money. That's the whole point. If we had money, we wouldn't be here asking you for help. You have jobs. You have income. You could save." "For how long?" Amanda's voice rose. "For 5 years? 10 years? I'm 28 years old. Margaret, I don't want to be 40 before I get to see Europe. I want to have experiences while I'm young enough to enjoy them. And you want me to pay for those experiences by giving up the few precious things I have left of my husband." "Your dead husband," Amanda snapped, and immediately I saw Jonathan flinch beside her. "Your dead husband who can't use those things anymore, who would probably want his son to be happy, who would understand that life is for the living." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Thomas's clock on the mantelpiece. I stared at this young woman who had married my son, who lived in my old neighborhood, who had never worked a day in the kind of job that required her to save for months to buy a simple gift for someone she loved. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" Amanda looked genuinely shocked. "Get out of my house, both of you." Jonathan finally looked up. "Mom." "No, Jonathan. I've listened to enough. I've been called selfish, dramatic, and a hoarder. I've been told that my grief is inconvenient and my memories are worthless. I've had my possessions inventoried without permission, and my dead husband's memory used to manipulate me. I want you both to leave." Amanda stood up, her eyes bright with anger. "Fine, but when you're sitting here alone with your precious jewelry, remember that you chose objects over people. You chose the past over your son's future." After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the silence and realized that something fundamental had shifted. I'd spent 3 years trying to build a relationship with Amanda, trying to be the mother-in-law she could love and respect. I'd bitten my tongue when she criticized my cooking, my decorating, my clothes. I'd smiled and nodded when she made suggestions about how I should live my life as a widow. But this morning, for the first time, I'd seen the real Amanda, the woman who believed she was entitled to whatever she wanted, regardless of the cost to others. And more heartbreakingly, I'd seen what my son had become under her influence, a man willing to hurt his own mother to keep his wife happy. That's when I realized there was something I could do that would surprise them all. Something that would teach them about the real value of things, about what it meant to choose people over possessions. I was going to give my jewelry away, just not to them. That afternoon, I drove to downtown Cleveland for the first time in months. My hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as I navigated streets that had changed so much since Thomas and I used to come here for dinner dates. New buildings had sprouted up between the familiar ones, and parking had become a maze of meters and time limits that made me feel older than my 60 years. I found what I was looking for on Euclid Avenue, Hartwell and Associates, the estate jewelry appraiser Amanda had probably researched online. The shop had an elegant storefront with security cameras and a buzzer system, the kind of place that dealt in serious valuables. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, gathering courage before finally walking inside. The owner, Mr. Hartwell, was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When I explained that I wanted my jewelry appraised, he led me to a private consultation room lined with velvet-covered tables and professional lighting. "These are beautiful pieces," he said, as I carefully removed each item from my purse. "The emerald ring is particularly stunning, probably 1970s. Excellent clarity. And this pearl necklace, these are genuine cultured pearls, very well maintained." I watched him examine each piece with a jeweler's loupe, making notes on a professional form. The diamond bracelet caught the light as he turned it, sending tiny rainbows across the wall. Thomas's watch ticked steadily in its own rhythm, as reliable as the man who'd worn it for 30 years. "Mrs. Ellison, if you don't mind me asking, what's the purpose of this appraisal? Insurance? Estate planning? Or are you considering selling?" I hesitated. "I'm exploring my options." He nodded professionally. "Well, I can tell you that these pieces are worth quite a bit more than most people would expect. The emerald ring alone is worth approximately $4,000. The pearl set is about $3,000. The diamond bracelet, given the quality of the stones, is worth around $5,000. And this Omega watch, your husband had excellent taste. It's worth about $3,000. $15,000. Amanda had been right about the total value, which somehow made me feel worse. She'd done her homework, had known exactly what she was asking me to give up. "Would you be interested in purchasing them if I decided to sell?" I asked. "Absolutely. I have clients who specifically look for estate pieces with this level of quality. I could offer you $12,000 for the lot. That's a fair price. That accounts for the retail markup I'd need to add. $12,000. Enough for Amanda's dream honeymoon, but not the full amount they'd wanted. I wondered if she'd accept it, or if she'd find a way to make me feel guilty for not getting the maximum value. "I need to think about it," I told him. "Of course. Here's my card. These pieces aren't going anywhere. Jewelry like this holds its value beautifully." I drove home in a daze, the appraisal paperwork sitting on my passenger seat like evidence of something I hadn't committed yet. $15,000 worth of love distilled down to market value. Thomas would have been amazed. He'd never imagined that his thoughtful gifts would become so valuable over the decades. That evening, I called my sister Patricia in Arizona. Pat was 3 years older than me and had always been the practical one, the sister who spoke her mind without worrying about hurt feelings. "Maggie, what's wrong?" she asked immediately. "You sound terrible." I told her everything. Amanda's demands, Jonathan's ultimatum, the appraisal I'd gotten that afternoon. Pat listened without interrupting, making small humming sounds that I recognized from childhood as her thinking noises. "That little bitch," she said finally, and her vehemence surprised me. "Patricia!" "What?" "That's what she is, honey. She's a manipulative little gold digger who's turned your son against you. And Jonathan! God, Maggie, what's happened to that boy? He's trying to save his marriage. His marriage to a woman who threatens to leave him if he can't buy her expensive vacations? Honey, that's not a marriage worth saving." I sat in my kitchen, twisting the phone cord around my finger the way I had as a teenager. But if I don't help them, and she does leave him, then I'll have lost my son for nothing. And if you do help them, what then? Next year it'll be a new car. The year after that, a bigger house. When does it end, Maggie? When you've sold everything Thomas ever gave you to fund Amanda's lifestyle. Put that way, it sounded even worse than I'd imagined. I just don't know what to do, Pat. I know what I'd do, she said firmly. I'd tell that girl exactly where she can stick her honeymoon plans. But you're not me. You're too nice. Always have been. You let people walk all over you because you're afraid of conflict. I'm not afraid of conflict. Really? Then why didn't you tell Amanda to go to hell the first time she suggested selling your wedding jewelry? I didn't have an answer for that. Pat was right. I'd spent my whole life avoiding confrontation, trying to keep everyone happy even when it meant sacrificing my own needs. What would Thomas say? Pat asked gently. I closed my eyes, trying to channel my husband's voice. He'd say family comes first. Which family, honey? The family that loves and respects you, or the family that treats you like a bank account? After I hung up with Pat, I sat in my kitchen until well past midnight, thinking about family and loyalty, and the difference between love and obligation. Thomas's watch ticked on my wrist, steady and reliable, marking time that felt both precious and heavy. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. I knew what I was going to do with my jewelry, and it wasn't what anyone expected. I drove to the Cleveland Women's Shelter, a place I'd volunteered at years ago when Jonathan was in high school. The building looked smaller than I remembered, its brick facade weathered but welcoming. Inside, the familiar smell of industrial coffee and fresh laundry brought back memories of Saturday mornings spent serving meals and sorting donations. Margaret Ellison, the voice belonged to Sarah Chen, the shelter director who'd been there for over a decade. What a wonderful surprise. It's been too long. Hello, Sarah. I was wondering if we could talk about your programs here. She led me to her office, a cramped space filled with filing cabinets and inspirational posters. Are you thinking about volunteering again? We'd love to have you back. Actually, I wanted to ask about your jewelry donation program. I remember you mentioning that you help women sell jewelry for emergency funds. Sarah's face lit up. Yes, we do. So many of our clients come here with nothing but the jewelry they're wearing. Wedding rings, family heirlooms, gifts from better times. We have partnerships with several reputable dealers who give fair prices, and we help the women navigate the process safely. What kind of situations do they usually face? Everything you can imagine. Women fleeing domestic violence who need money for security deposits on apartments. Mothers who need to pay for their children's medical expenses. Women starting over after divorce who need job interview clothes and transportation. The jewelry often represents their only liquid asset. I thought about my emerald ring, about the love Thomas had put into choosing it for me. What if that love could be transformed into something else? Into safety for a woman fleeing an abusive relationship, into medical care for a sick child, into hope for someone who'd lost everything. I have some pieces I'd like to donate, I said. Sarah looked surprised. That's incredibly generous, Margaret. Are you sure? I'm sure. They're valuable pieces, and I think they could help several women. Would you like to meet some of our current clients? Sometimes donors like to understand where their contributions are going. I'd like that very much. Sarah introduced me to 3 women in the shelter's common area. Maria, a young mother with 2 small children, was saving money to move into an apartment after leaving her abusive husband. Jennifer, a woman about my age, was recovering from a stroke and trying to pay for physical therapy. Her insurance didn't cover. Carol, barely out of her teens, was working 2 jobs while trying to finish high school and support her baby. Their stories broke my heart and filled me with purpose. These women needed help in tangible, immediate ways. They didn't want luxury vacations or expensive experiences. They wanted safety, health, and the chance to build better lives for themselves and their children. That afternoon, I returned home and carefully removed each piece of jewelry from my jewelry box. I held the emerald ring up to the light one last time, watching it sparkle with the same fire Thomas had seen when he chose it for me. Then I wrapped each piece in soft cloth and placed them in a small box. Before I left for the shelter again, I wrote a letter. To the women who will receive these pieces, each item represents love given freely, without expectation or demand. My husband chose these gifts carefully, wanting to show his love through beautiful things. Now I want his love to continue working in the world through you. Use these to build something better for yourselves and your families. You deserve beautiful things, and you deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. Margaret. At the shelter, I handed the box to Sarah along with the appraisal paperwork. The total value is about $15,000, I said. I'd like it divided among women who need help starting over. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, this is extraordinary. This could change multiple lives. Good. That's what I want. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with making other people happy or avoiding conflict. I'd taken control of my own story, made a choice that honored Thomas's memory while helping people who truly needed it. Now I just had to tell Jonathan and Amanda what I'd done. That evening, I called Jonathan. When he answered, his voice was cautious, as if he wasn't sure what to expect from me. Hi, Mom. Jonathan, I need you and Amanda to come over tomorrow evening. I have something to tell you both about the jewelry. I heard his sharp intake of breath. You've decided to help us. I've made a decision, yes. Can you be here at 7? Of course. Mom, thank you. I know this wasn't easy, but Amanda will be so. 7 o'clock, Jonathan. We'll talk then. After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the empty space on my dresser, where Thomas's watch used to sit. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but peaceful. I'd chosen love over possession, service over sentiment, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt proud of the woman looking back at me from Thomas's old mirror. Tomorrow, I would face their shock, their anger, possibly their rejection. But tonight, I was exactly who I wanted to be. A woman who understood that the most precious things in life can't be bought, sold, or stolen, because they live in our hearts and actions, not in our jewelry boxes. They arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, and I could see the anticipation in their faces through my front window before they even reached the door. Amanda was practically glowing, her smile brighter than I'd seen it in months. Jonathan looked relieved, his shoulders more relaxed than they'd been during our last conversation. They thought they'd won. Mom, Jonathan said, wrapping me in a hug that felt genuine for the first time in weeks. I'm so glad you decided to help us. I know it wasn't easy. Amanda hung back slightly, but her expression was triumphant. She was already mentally spending the money, probably calculating how many luxury dinners and shopping trips she could fit into their Italian adventure. Please, sit down, I said, gesturing toward the living room. Would you like coffee, tea? We're fine, Amanda said quickly. We're just excited to hear your decision. I settled into my armchair across from them, my hands folded in my lap. They sat together on the couch, leaning forward expectantly, and I realized this might be the last time I'd see them look at me with anything resembling warmth. I did have the jewelry appraised, I began. How much? Amanda asked immediately, unable to contain herself. The total value is approximately $15,000. Amanda's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. 15,000? That's even more than I thought. We could upgrade to first-class flights, maybe add a few extra days in Rome. I donated it all to the Cleveland Women's Shelter. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. For a moment, neither of them moved. Amanda's smile froze on her face, becoming something grotesque and unnatural. Jonathan blinked slowly, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What? Amanda's voice came out as barely a whisper. So I donated every piece to the women's shelter downtown. The emerald ring, the pearl necklace, the diamond bracelet, and Thomas's watch. They'll be sold to help women who are starting over after leaving abusive relationships, or who need money for medical expenses, or who are trying to build better lives for their children. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I watched as understanding dawned on their faces, followed immediately by shock, then fury. Amanda was the first to recover her voice. You're joking. I'm not joking. You gave away $15,000 worth of jewelry to strangers instead of helping your own family. I helped the family that needed it most. Amanda shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. Those people aren't your family. We are. Jonathan is your son. Yes, He is. And I raised him to understand that love isn't something you buy with expensive gifts. Jonathan finally found his voice. Mom, please tell me this is some kind of lesson, and you haven't actually given the jewelry away yet. I looked at my son. This man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through childhood illnesses, cheered at every baseball game and graduation. It's done, Jonathan. The pieces are already at the shelter. Get them back. Amanda's voice was sharp, commanding. Call them right now and tell them you made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. Yes, you did. Amanda was shouting now, her carefully composed facade completely shattered. You made a huge mistake. That jewelry was worth enough to give us the honeymoon we deserved. And you threw it away on people who will probably just spend the money on drugs or alcohol. The cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. This was what she really thought of people less fortunate than herself, that they were somehow undeserving of help, that their poverty was a moral failing rather than circumstance. Those women aren't drug addicts, Amanda. They're mothers trying to protect their children, women recovering from serious illnesses, young people working multiple jobs to survive. They're exactly the kind of people Thomas and I always tried to help when we could. Thomas is dead, Amanda screamed. He's been dead for 2 years, and you're still making decisions based on what some dead man would have wanted instead of helping your living son. Jonathan winced at her words, but he didn't correct her. Instead, he turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, desperate. Mom, you have to fix this. Call the shelter and explain that you weren't thinking clearly. Tell them you're grieving and you made an impulsive decision. I was thinking perfectly clearly, more clearly than I have in months. No, you weren't. Amanda was pacing now, her hands clenched into fists. You were being spiteful. You did this to punish us for asking for help, to make us feel guilty for wanting nice things. I did this because I realized that love isn't transactional. Real love doesn't come with price tags. Don't lecture us about love. Amanda whirled around to face me. You know what love is? Love is helping your family when they need it. Love is making sacrifices for the people who matter most. Love is not choosing random strangers over your own son. Amanda, Jonathan said quietly. Maybe we should. No! She cut him off with a violent gesture. I'm not going to sit here and listen to her justify this betrayal. She knew how much this trip meant to us. She knew it was our only chance to have the honeymoon we dreamed about, and she chose to hurt us instead. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 60 years in my bones. I chose to help people who truly needed help, not people who wanted luxury vacations. We needed help too. Amanda's voice cracked with emotion, but I could see that her tears were born of fury, not sadness. We needed help, and you turned us away. You needed money for a vacation. The women at that shelter needed money for survival. It wasn't just a vacation. Amanda was sobbing now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. It was our chance to start over, to have something beautiful together, to feel like we mattered. But you took that away from us. You took away our dreams and gave them to people you don't even know. Looking at her, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete clarity about who Amanda really was. She wasn't evil, wasn't malicious in the traditional sense. She was simply someone who had never learned to distinguish between wants and needs. Someone who believed that her desires were inherently more important than other people's necessities. Your dreams aren't worth more than their survival, I said quietly. Yes, they are, Amanda shouted without hesitation. Yes, they are worth more. Because we're your family. Because Jonathan is your son. Because we've been there for you when you needed us. When have you been there for me, Amanda? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking to Jonathan for support. We visit you, Jonathan said weakly. When you need something, yes. When was the last time either of you came by just to see how I was doing? Another silence. I realized it had been months since they'd visited without an agenda. Months since Jonathan had called just to chat about his day or ask about mine. We've been busy, Amanda said defensively. We both work full-time jobs. But you had time to research the value of my jewelry. You had time to plan an expensive vacation. You had time to pressure me for weeks to sell the only reminders I have of my marriage, because we thought you'd want to help us. Amanda's voice was getting higher, more desperate, because we thought family meant something to you. Family does mean something to me. That's why this hurts so much. Jonathan finally stood up, and I saw something in his face that broke my heart, a hardness I'd never seen before, a coldness that reminded me uncomfortably of Amanda's calculating expressions. Mom, you've made your choice, but you need to understand that actions have consequences. What does that mean? It means, Amanda said, stepping up beside her husband, that if you can't be there for us when we need you, then we can't be there for you either. The threat hung in the air between us. They were cutting me off, choosing their disappointment over our relationship. I looked at my son, waiting for him to contradict his wife, to say that he wouldn't abandon his mother over money, but he remained silent, his jaw set in that stubborn way I remembered from his teenage years. So this is how it ends, I said. You're going to walk away from me because I chose to help people in desperate situations, instead of funding your luxury vacation. You chose strangers over your son, Amanda said coldly. You made it clear that our happiness doesn't matter to you. So why should your happiness matter to us? They moved toward the door, and I felt panic rising in my chest. Despite everything, despite their cruelty and manipulation, the thought of losing Jonathan completely terrified me. Jonathan, please, don't do this. Don't let money destroy our relationship. He turned back to me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised, the son who used to bring me dandelions and tell me he loved me. But then Amanda's hand found his arm, and the moment passed. You destroyed it, Mom, when you chose to give away our future to strangers. Your future isn't my responsibility to fund, and your loneliness isn't our responsibility to fix, Amanda said, with a cruelty that took my breath away. After they left, I sat in my empty living room and cried harder than I had since Thomas's funeral. I cried for the relationship I'd lost with my son, for the man he'd become under Amanda's influence, for the future grandchildren I might never meet. I cried for the naive woman I'd been just a week ago, who'd still believed that love could overcome selfishness and greed. But underneath the grief, there was something else, a small, steady flame of pride. I'd stood up for what I believed in. I'd chosen compassion over convenience, service over selfishness. I'd honored Thomas's memory not by clinging to objects, but by living the values he'd taught me. The women at the shelter would get their help. Maria would find a safe apartment for her children. Jennifer would get the physical therapy she needed. Carol would have a chance to finish school and build a better life. My jewelry would become transformation, hope, new beginnings. That night, I called Sarah Chen at the shelter. Margaret, I was just thinking about you. We've already had 3 women express interest in having their situations evaluated for the jewelry program. Your donation is going to make such a difference. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Are you all right? You sound sad. I looked around my quiet house, at the empty spaces where my jewelry used to be, at the photos of Jonathan that now seemed like pictures of a stranger. I'm all right, I said, and realized it was true. I'm exactly where I need to be. 6 months passed before I heard from Jonathan again. 6 months of empty Sundays, of holidays spent alone, of birthday cards I wrote but never sent. I'd learned to fill the silence with volunteer work at the shelter, with book club meetings at the library, with morning walks through the neighborhood where Thomas and I had dreamed of growing old together. The call came on a Tuesday evening in April, just as I was finishing dinner. When I saw Jonathan's name on the caller ID, my heart hammered so hard I thought it might stop altogether. Mom? His voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the cold tone he'd used during our last conversation. Jonathan? I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. Can we talk? Can I come over? Of course. 20 minutes later, he stood on my front porch, looking like he'd aged years in the months since I'd seen him. His face was thinner, his hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy worry. You look tired, I said, leading him into the kitchen where we'd had so many conversations over the years. I am tired. He sat down heavily in his old chair, the one he'd claimed as his own when he was 12 years old. Mom, I need to tell you something. I poured 2 cups of coffee and waited. The kitchen felt different with him in it, fuller somehow, as if a missing piece had been restored to its proper place. Amanda left me, he said finally. I felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness for his pain, relief that her influence was gone, and a deep maternal urge to hold him and tell him everything would be all right. When, 3 weeks ago, she met someone else, a guy she works with who has money, who can give her the lifestyle she wants. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jonathan had been cutting off his relationship with me to please his wife, she'd been looking for someone who could better fund her dreams. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know you loved her. Did I? He looked up at me with confusion in his eyes. Or did I just love the idea of being someone she could respect? I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I can't remember the last time she did something just to make me happy. You know, everything was always about what I could do for her. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. It was the first time I'd touched my son in 6 months, and the contact made my eyes sting with unshed tears. Love shouldn't feel like a performance, Jonathan. I know that now. But it took losing everything to understand it. He turned his hand over so our palms touched. She took half of everything when she left. The house, the savings account, even the wedding gifts. Her lawyer was very thorough. Where are you living? I rented a studio apartment across town. It's small, but it's peaceful. No one's telling me I'm not enough, that I need to work harder or make more money or prove my worth by buying expensive things. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking coffee and letting the weight of his words settle between us. Outside, the maple trees Thomas and I had planted were budding with new spring growth, promising another season of shade and beauty. Mom, I need to apologize, Jonathan said suddenly, for everything I said, everything I did, for choosing her over you, for calling you selfish, for cutting you out of my life when you were just trying to do the right thing. You don't need to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm now, more like the man I'd raised. I've had months to think about what happened, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. You were grieving Dad, and instead of supporting you, I let Amanda convince me that your feelings didn't matter. You were trying to save your marriage. I was trying to save something that was never real in the first place. Amanda never loved me, Mom. She loved what she thought I could become, the successful husband who could fund her dreams. When it became clear that I wasn't going to be that person, she found someone who was. I squeezed his hand. I'm sorry you had to learn that the hard way. Are you really? He gave me a sad smile. Because I think part of you always knew she wasn't right for me. I wanted you to be happy. If she made you happy, she didn't, though. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I was never happy with her. I was exhausted, constantly trying to be someone I'm not, constantly failing to meet her expectations. The only time I felt good about myself was when I was giving her something she wanted. And now I'm poor and alone and sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment. And you know what? I'm happier than I've been in years. That made me smile despite everything. Good. That's how I want you to feel. I went to the women's shelter last week, he said quietly. My breath caught. You did. I wanted to see where the jewelry went, to understand what you did and why you did it. Sarah Chen showed me around, introduced me to some of the women who've been helped by donations like yours. What did you think? I think I finally understood what love actually looks like. Not the kind that demands proof or payment, but the kind that sees need and responds without expecting anything in return. He pulled something from his pocket, a small business card with the shelter's logo. I signed up to volunteer there, just a few hours a week, helping with maintenance and repairs. It turns out I'm pretty good with my hands when I'm not being told I'm worthless for not making enough money. Pride swelled in my chest. This was the son I'd raised, the boy who'd helped neighbors with yard work and volunteered at church dinners. Amanda had buried that person under layers of inadequacy and shame, but he was still there, waiting to emerge. Your father would be proud of you. I hope so. I hope he'd be proud of both of us. Jonathan paused, staring into his coffee cup. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone, but if you're willing, I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship. Not the way it was before, because that clearly wasn't working, but something new, something honest. Oh, sweetheart. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Of course I forgive you. You're my son. I never stopped loving you, even when I was angry and hurt. I want to earn that love this time. I want to be the kind of man who deserves a mother like you. You already are that man, Jonathan. You just forgot for a while. We talked until nearly midnight, filling in the gaps of the months we'd lost, sharing stories and memories and dreams for the future. He told me about the studio apartment he was slowly making into a home, about the simple pleasure of choosing his own furniture, without worrying whether it met someone else's standards. I told him about my volunteer work, about the friendships I'd built with other women at the shelter, about the peace I'd found in helping others. When he finally left, he hugged me at the door. A real hug, the kind that comes from genuine affection rather than obligation. I love you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. I could never give up on you. You're my greatest treasure. After he drove away, I sat in my living room and thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. Losing my jewelry had felt like losing the last pieces of Thomas, but now I understood that the real treasures, love, family, purpose, connection, couldn't be stolen or sold or given away. They lived in our choices, our actions, our willingness to put others' needs before our own wants. The emerald ring that had sat in my jewelry box for months was now helping Maria pay for a safe apartment where her children could sleep without fear. The pearl necklace Thomas had saved to buy me was funding Jennifer's physical therapy sessions. The diamond bracelet was helping Carol finish high school and build a better future. And Thomas's watch, his precious, reliable watch, was ticking on the wrist of a young woman named Lisa, who'd escaped an abusive marriage and needed something beautiful to remind her that she was worth loving. Their stories had become part of my story, their hope intertwined with my grief, their new beginnings built partly on the foundation of my letting go. Thomas's love continued to work in the world, transformed from objects into action, from possession into purpose. 3 months later, I stood in the back of a small church watching Maria graduate from a nurse's aid program. She'd used part of the money from my emerald ring to pay for the training, and now she had a steady job and a bright future ahead of her. When she walked across the stage to receive her certificate, she caught my eye in the audience and smiled. A smile that told me she understood that strangers could be family, that love could come in unexpected forms. After the ceremony, Maria introduced me to her children, 2 beautiful little girls who called me Abuela Margaret and hugged my legs with the fierce affection of children who understood the value of kindness. Their mother had told them that a nice lady had helped make their new life possible, and they wanted to thank me with drawings they'd made at school. One picture showed a house with flowers in the front yard and the words, "Safe Home," written in crayon across the top. The other showed a woman with gray hair and a big smile, surrounded by hearts and labeled Friend Angel. As I looked at those precious drawings, I realized that Amanda had been wrong about so many things, but especially about one crucial point. The memories weren't just in my heart. They were alive in the world, growing and changing and creating new stories every day. Thomas's love hadn't ended with his death or disappeared when I donated his gifts. It had multiplied, become something larger and more beautiful than either of us had ever imagined. 6 months after Jonathan's return, we established a new tradition. Every Sunday, we volunteered together at the shelter, he handling repairs and maintenance, me helping with intake and counseling. We worked side by side, this son I almost lost, and this mother who learned that sometimes you have to let go of what you're clinging to in order to hold on to what truly matters. Amanda remarried quickly. I heard from mutual acquaintances, a wealthy developer who could afford the lifestyle she'd always wanted. I felt no satisfaction in learning that her new marriage was reportedly troubled, that money hadn't solved the fundamental emptiness that drove her constant need for more. I simply felt grateful that Jonathan had escaped before he lost himself completely in the effort to fill that void. On quiet evenings, when Jonathan visits for dinner, and we sit in the same kitchen where this whole story began, I sometimes think about the past that brought us here. The pain, the loss, the terrible months of estrangement. They were all necessary somehow, part of a larger story about learning what love actually means. I keep one photo of Thomas on my dresser now, the one from our 20th anniversary where he's laughing at something I'd said. I don't need the jewelry to remember him because I carry him with me in every choice I make, every act of kindness I perform, every moment I choose compassion over comfort. And sometimes when I'm helping a young woman figure out how to start over, or when I see Jonathan's face light up because he's fixed something that was broken, I swear I can feel Thomas smiling, proud of the way his love continues to ripple outward into the world, creating beauty and hope in places we never could have imagined. The jewelry is gone, but the love remains, transformed, multiplied, more precious than any gem ever could be. 2 years later, I received an invitation that changed everything I thought I knew about the ripple effects of kindness. The envelope was cream-colored and elegant, addressed in careful handwriting to Mrs. Margaret Ellison. Inside was an invitation to a wedding. Lisa Martinez to David Chen, along with a handwritten note that made my hands tremble as I read it. Dear Margaret, you don't know me, but your husband's watch has been ticking on my wrist for 2 years now, marking time as I rebuilt my life from nothing. I escaped an abusive marriage with only the clothes on my back, and the women's shelter became my sanctuary. When Sarah gave me Thomas's watch, she told me it came from a woman who understood that love should never hurt, that real love sets you free rather than holding you prisoner. I wore that watch to job interviews, to court hearings for my divorce, to therapy sessions, and to my first day of work as a paralegal. Every tick reminded me that I was worth saving, that someone I'd never met believed I deserved beautiful things and a beautiful life. Now I'm marrying a wonderful man who sees my scars as proof of my strength, not as flaws to be hidden. David works at the shelter too. He's Sarah's nephew, and he started volunteering there after hearing about all the lives being changed by donations like yours. I want you to be at our wedding, Margaret. I want to thank you in person for giving me time, literal time, measured by your husband's watch, but also the gift of believing I was worth saving. Without you, I never would have met David, never would have learned what healthy love looks like. Please come. Let me show you what your generosity grew into. Lisa. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where this whole journey began, and wept tears of joy. Through my window, I could see Jonathan working in my garden, planting new roses where the old ones had grown wild. He'd moved back into his childhood bedroom 6 months ago, not because he couldn't afford his own place anymore, but because we'd both realized that some separations aren't meant to be permanent. Mom, what's wrong? He came inside, dirt still on his hands, concern creasing his face. I handed him the invitation and watched his expression change as he read it. She's marrying Sarah's nephew, the Sarah from the shelter. It appears so, and she wants me at the wedding. Jonathan sat down across from me, still holding the invitation. This is incredible, has Mom. Dad's watch. It didn't just help her survive. It helped her find love. Real love this time, I said, thinking about the difference between Lisa's gratitude and Amanda's demands. The wedding was held in the same small church where I'd watched Maria graduate from nursing school. Lisa was radiant in a simple white dress, and when she saw me in the congregation, she pressed her hand to her heart, to the place where Thomas's watch hung on a delicate chain around her neck. During the reception, she pulled me aside to a quiet corner where we could talk. I almost sold the watch, she confided. When things got really hard, when I was living in my car before the shelter had room for me, I thought about pawning it for grocery money. What stopped you? The inscription on the back. I'd never noticed it before, but one night when I was feeling hopeless, I took it off and saw what Thomas had engraved there. Time heals all wounds. Love conquers all. Forever yours, Thomas. My breath caught. I'd forgotten about that inscription, added when Thomas had the watch repaired for our 15th anniversary. I realized that selling it would be giving up on the promise those words represented. Lisa continued. So I kept it, and every time I wanted to quit, to give up on building a new life, I'd read those words and remember that someone believed I was worth saving. At that moment, a young man approached us, tall, kind-faced, with Sarah's gentle eyes. You must be Margaret, he said, extending his hand. I'm David, the incredibly lucky groom. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope. More than good. Lisa talks about you like you're her guardian angel, and my Aunt Sarah says you're the reason she stays motivated in her work, knowing there are people like you who truly understand what the shelter represents. Your aunt does the real work. I just helped in a small way. Small? Lisa laughed. Margaret, do you know how many lives your donation touched? Your jewelry funded emergency housing for 12 women. Your emerald ring alone paid for Maria's nursing certification, and she's now working at the shelter part-time, helping other women navigate the healthcare system." David nodded enthusiastically. "And Carol, the teenager who was trying to finish high school, she graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to Cleveland State. She's studying social work now, wants to come back and work at the shelter when she graduates. Jennifer finished her physical therapy and got a job at a rehabilitation center," Lisa added. "She sends Christmas cards to the shelter every year, always mentioning the woman who made her recovery possible." I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were telling me. I'd given away my jewelry to help a few women, but it had created a network of healing and hope that was still growing. "There's something else," David said, glancing at his new wife. "Lisa and I have been talking about what we want to do to pay forward what was given to us. We're starting a foundation," Lisa said. "The Thomas Ellison Foundation for New Beginnings. We want to help other women the way you helped me, but also help their children with educational expenses, job training, things that break the cycle of poverty and abuse." I stared at them, speechless. They were naming their foundation after my husband, carrying his memory forward in ways I never could have imagined. "We'd like you to be on the board," David said. "Your wisdom, your understanding of what it means to transform grief into hope. We need that guidance." 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the Thomas Ellison Foundation, looking at the photos on the wall, pictures of women who'd been helped, children who'd graduated from college, families who'd found stability and peace. Thomas's watch appeared in several of the photos, passed from woman to woman like a baton of hope. Lisa had created a tradition. Each woman who received help from the foundation got to wear the watch for a month, to feel its steady rhythm, reminding her that time would heal, that love would conquer, that she was worth saving. Then she'd pass it on to the next woman who needed that reminder. Jonathan joined the foundation too, heading up the maintenance and housing assistance programs. Amanda was now a distant memory, a cautionary tale about the difference between love and transaction. He'd started dating again, a social worker named Rebecca, who volunteered at the shelter and understood that the best relationships were built on shared values rather than shared bank accounts. One evening, as Jonathan and I walked through the cemetery where Thomas was buried, I told him about the inscription on the watch, about how his father's words were still working in the world decades after he'd written them. "Do you think he knew?" Jonathan asked. "When he had those words engraved, do you think he knew they'd end up meaning so much to strangers?" I looked at Thomas's headstone, simple granite with just his name, dates, and the words, "Beloved husband and father." "I think he knew that love has a way of multiplying when you give it away freely," I said. "He always told me that the best gifts keep on giving long after the giver is gone." At the Foundation's first annual gala, I was asked to give a speech about the origins of our work, standing at the podium, looking out at an audience filled with survivors, volunteers, donors, and supporters. I thought about the journey that had brought us all together. 2 years ago, I began, my daughter-in-law asked me to sell my jewelry to fund her honeymoon. She saw my possessions as objects to be converted to cash for her pleasure. I chose instead to give them to women who would transform them into freedom, safety, and new beginnings. I paused, finding Lisa and David in the audience, seeing Thomas's watch glinting at Lisa's throat. I thought I was giving away the last pieces of my husband, the final reminders of our love story. Instead, I learned that love stories don't end. They multiply, they transform, they become part of larger narratives about hope, conquering despair, and community healing brokenness. After the gala, as Jonathan and I drove home through the Cleveland streets where I'd lived my entire adult life, I thought about the strange mathematics of generosity, how giving away everything I'd thought I treasured had resulted in receiving more than I'd ever dreamed possible. "Then no regrets?" Jonathan asked, as if reading my thoughts. I looked at my son, this man who'd found his way back to kindness, who'd learned to measure worth in service rather than salary, who'd discovered that the best inheritance isn't money, but values passed down through generations. "None," I said, and meant it completely. The last time I'd seen Amanda was at a grocery store 3 months earlier. She'd looked older, despite her expensive clothes and perfect makeup. Her new husband, according to neighborhood gossip, had turned out to be controlling and demanding, expecting her to perform the role of trophy wife without any of the joy she'd thought money would bring. She'd seen me across the produce section and turned away quickly, but not before I caught a glimpse of something in her face. Regret, perhaps, or recognition that her pursuit of material happiness had led her to an elegant prison of her own making. I'd felt sadness for her then, understanding finally that her grasping for expensive things had come from the same deep insecurity that had driven her to try to control Jonathan. She'd never learned that security comes from being valued for who you are, not what you can provide or acquire. Now, as I sat in my garden on a warm September evening, watching Jonathan and Rebecca plant bulbs that would bloom next spring, I marveled at how the story had unfolded. Amanda had demanded that I sell my treasures for her temporary pleasure. Instead, I'd given them away for others, permanent transformation. Thomas's watch was still ticking somewhere in the city, on the wrist of a woman who needed to be reminded that she was worth saving. The emerald ring had become Maria's nursing career, which had become health care for dozens of vulnerable women. The pearl necklace had become Jennifer's mobility, which had become hope for other stroke survivors. The diamond bracelet had become Carol's education, which would become a lifetime of service to others. And what had I lost? Nothing that mattered. I'd gained a son who knew his true worth, a purpose that filled my days with meaning, and the knowledge that love, when freely given, creates miracles that last far longer than any material possession ever could. As the sun set over Cleveland, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I touched the simple chain around my neck, the only piece of jewelry I wore now, a gift from the Foundation women. It held no gems, no precious metals, just a small pendant engraved with Thomas's words. Time heals all wounds, love conquers all. But those words, I'd learned, were worth more than all the jewels in the world.